I am so happy to have you here.
Happy to be here.
Dr. Russell Kennedy.
Yeah.
I've become a huge fan ever since I myself started to experience horrible anxiety and panic, which I'm just going to use this episode to also ask you a lot of personal questions for my own personal healing. Please.
Yes, absolutely.
My listeners know, because I've been really open about it, but I had a crazy experience with anxiety that started at the end of last year. And pretty much I was in like a 12-week panic attack that never ended. And although I know that's not possible, because my therapist told me how panic attacks work, it would be like one would end and the other would start. And so just all the time. And this started, I did 6 sessions of ketamine therapy at the end of last year. And I love psychedelics for healing. Yeah. But this was too much for me. Yeah. And 6 sessions in 3 weeks.
Yeah, that's too much.
It brought up childhood traumas, repressed memories that I didn't know existed.
Yeah.
I thought I had the best memory in the world. I remember everything. All right, so I thought. I remember what I wore on the first day of kindergarten. But then I had these repressed, traumatic, big T trauma memories that threw me. I've never felt so unsafe in my life. So we're just getting right into it.
Yeah, let's go.
What do you have to say about all this?
Okay, well, I mean, basically I trained as a medical doctor and a neuroscientist. And I suffered myself with crippling anxiety for a very, very long time. And I tried every type of therapy, CBT, ACT, LMNOP, just every therapy that there is. And nothing really seemed to help me. So I delved into psychedelics as well. I didn't have a great experience either with psychedelics. I found that it brought up a whole lot of old trauma. And to do, 6 episodes in 3 weeks or 6 doses in 3 weeks is just way too much. Like, that's just way too much. Because, the way the nervous system rewires itself, it's gradual. So we have this cortical brain, this part of us that thinks and understands language, and then we have this subcortical brain, the lower part of our brain that kind of controls our body. And the pons, the medulla, the amygdala, people have heard of for sure. None of those things understand language. So why are we trying to use language to heal these things? Now, it'll help for sure. But when you want to heal something, you have to go to the root cause. And you also have to do it slowly. Like, the nervous system doesn't wire itself very quickly. So especially if you have trauma, especially if you have old patterns of behavior and patterns of behavior that were, say, maladaptive but helped you as a child, like OCD, eating disorders, this kind of stuff. This is the stuff that we gain some sense of security and control from, because although it hurts us, we know it. It's like that T-shirt that says, I'm in my own little world, but it's okay. They know me here, right? So it's understanding what your patterns are, and the fact that we have to change those patterns both cortically, both through language, and subcortically through feeling. And that's how we actually heal from anxiety, is changing the feeling, not so much changing the thinking. Changing the thinking will help. But if you only change the thinking, you're always going to be treading water. You're always going to be having it. I've seen that on my healing journey this year, because when I started to have these panic attacks 24/7, I thought I was going crazy. So my only rational response to this feeling after all the ketamine, and I know that it rewires your brain and all these things, was I have flipped something in my brain. So now I'm just going to go insane, and I'm never going to be well, and I'm never going to be able to be a regular mom or human. And so that fear, which was all in the mind, but also in the body, because it was like racing heart. It was like my throat would close up, just like my stomach would be in knots. I couldn't eat for months. I just believed in the mind, this is true, even though so many people, from therapists to my family, were telling me it's not true. Right. You're completely sane, I promise. Yeah, I mean, it's funny that people that are going insane don't question their sanity.
I know. That's what my therapist always told me. She's like, I promise, because you're so aware and asking this question, you're sane. Yeah. I'm like, are you sure? I don't think so. So to give you a little more context, and then I have like a bunch of other questions for you, but just on this same subject, when the repressed memories came back up, something that it brought me back to was, as a child, I did have obsessive compulsive tendencies. Like, there's going to be fires, there's going to be kidnapping, like just all this stuff. And so even though it was different fears as an adult, it wasn't the fires or whatever. It was like, I can't function. I'm insane. I'm not going to be able to do my podcast. I'm going to have to quit my career.
Yeah.
Like those fears.
Yeah, and this is all left hemisphere stuff. So the brain is a meaning-making, make-sense machine.
Mm-hmm.
So if your body is full of this alarm, your brain has to do something with that, especially the left hemisphere, that analytical. It wants to know. So it will say, it will make up stories that are consistent with how you feel. So if you feel crazy, you're going to say, okay, well, you're going to be crazy for the rest of your life. And there is something in neuroscience we call the recency bias. And the recency bias is how I feel now is how I project I'm going to feel forever. So we don't really get a chance to see the forest for the trees. We don't get a chance to see this too shall pass. We just feel the way we're feeling at that point. And unfortunately, the way we're wired as human beings is that when we feel that way, there's a part of us that thinks this is never going to end. And it always ends. It always ends. So it's just realizing that your left hemisphere is going to go a bit nuts when you've got this alarm in your body. Now, did you have an absence from your parents before the age of 5? Like, were you separated from your mom or your dad for any length of time when you were a child?
Not really.
That you know
I mean,
of?
they would travel,
Okay.
for maybe like 10 days.
Okay.
But I had a nanny who was kind of like a third parent.
Okay.
So I always felt really safe, with either
Okay.
like one of the three of them. I don't think it was that.
No,
I
no.
mean, maybe.
Yeah, no. And this is what, we always want to go back and see, okay, what was it? What was it? Now, one of the things that I talk about with people is people will say, my childhood was great. My parents are good. They're still together, that kind of thing. And I'd say, well, did you have an absence from your parents? It's like they go back and say, oh, yeah, you know what? My mother went to the hospital when I was 2, and she was in there for 6 weeks, so she had complications, right? So being apart from your mother is very hard for a child's nervous system. 80% of your brain's development occurs before the age of 5 years old. So if you have a significant separation from a parent, so even though you had a nanny, and I'm not saying that this is it, but I'm just saying when you have a separation from your mother specifically before the age of 5, and that separation is longer than kind of a weekend, 2 to 3 days, that can actually steep your nervous system, because you were probably born sensitive anyway, Jordan. That's part of your. So sensitive kids basically are a lot more at risk of developing OCD, eating disorders, personality issues, all that kind of stuff, because their left hemisphere is looking for a reason to make them feel better. So we get used to sliding into our brain, sliding into our thinking, because as a child, we're kind of helpless and powerless. Our parents kind of decide what's going to happen, and then we kind of, have to go along with it. So a lot of times today, people, when you're anxious today, you're actually in the throwback, because the amygdala has no sense of time. That fear sort of detecting, nucleus in the brain called the amygdala has no sense of time. So when you go back to a certain point, say abandonment was your issue, and now your husband's going away on a business trip for a week, even though consciously hey, he's going to be back, he loves me, everything's okay, unconsciously, that will still come up. That old background alarm will still come up, and you'll be much more likely to go into an anxiety phase, because that's your old trauma, and it gets reignited. And so often we are upset with our parent or our child or whatever, and it's really not them. It's basically a just like when. It's like and I ask that to clients or patients all the time. It's like, okay, just like when? When did it feel like this when you were a child?
Wow. Okay, so then as a mother now, would you recommend obviously I'm not going to leave Atticus, my son, for a long time. Yeah. But if my husband and I wanted to go to Europe and he stays with my parents who are he's so close to, is that not good?
It depends on how sensitive Atticus is. And, it depends on how bonded, he is to both parents. Because usually if one parent goes, the other parent probably ideally before the age of 5 should stay.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it's not like, I did a lot of work with Gordon Neufeld, who's kind of like my developmental psychology mentor. And he talks about that, before the age of 5, 80% of your brain development occurs. And absences from a parent, even though they're with grandparents, even though they're with people that they love, can still cause some problems. Now, I don't want to freak people out, because what's going to happen is, I left my child when I was, when they were 2, and it was like, it's not every child, but if your child is really sensitive, you have to be really careful about leaving them, especially if you're the mom, for the first 5 years anyway.
Wow.
Yeah.
My brain is going a million miles a second.
It can cause long-term problems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, I'm happy that so far, if I've been gone, my husband's been there, and if he's been gone, I've been there. But, we're thinking about the future and more kids, and do we travel together for a little while, before then? But this is so good to know. And for anybody listening who either is a parent or maybe was left as a child for longer than a weekend, a lot of us are sensitive who listen to this podcast. Yeah. Some of us are so highly sensitive, and I'm one of those people.
So am I. And so is my daughter, Leandra, who's with me today.
Yeah, I know. I'm so happy that she's here.
Yeah.
You're so lucky that your dad knows all this stuff. So I want to hear about you. How did you get into this work?
Well, I was raised by parents. My mother was a registered nurse and very anxious. My father was a schizophrenic, so he would go off the rails about every 6 to 18 months, psychotic, wind up in the hospital, that kind of thing. So I learned as a child that life isn't safe. Life isn't stable. There's chaos there. And part of me recreated that chaos, because part of what we'll do as adults is we'll recreate our childhood unconsciously. So this is why, in my practice, I would see women who would pick alcoholic partners, and they had an alcoholic father. Not all the time, but what we do as children is we equate familiarity with security. So if your parents were yelling at each other all the time, there's part of your brain, and Freud called this the repetition compulsion, where you equate your parents yelling at each other with some form of security, because that was normal in your childhood. So when you hear people kind of yelling, there is a sense that you gravitate towards that, or you go the other way. It's like I can't stand that kind of stuff too. So it's really understanding that we are molded as children, and if you're sensitive, you're kind of double molded at that point, because you take in this whatever's familiar to you as a child and you create it in your adult. So I grew up with a mother who's quite nervous and anxious. Wonderful mother other than that, good provider. She was the one that had to sort of put food on the table because my dad was psychotic a lot of the time. And what happened with me is that created this place in me that I wasn't safe. And then the other thing that happened is I felt, as I got older, 6, 7, 8 years old, it's like I have to look after mom, or I have to look after dad. I'm the oldest boy in the family. I have one brother. So this created this thing where I got very, very good at reading both parents, people pleasing, all that kind of stuff, because if they weren't safe, I wasn't safe. So I sort of released my own feeling of things, or my own need to be my own self, and gravitated towards this people pleasing part, or being able to read, or being an empath, or whatever. Not crazy about that term, but it's just one of those things where I think you just learn how to read other people very, very well. And the problem with that is the better that you learn to read other people, the less you learn to read yourself. And that becomes a habit. And for me, the other thing that was really compounded matters is that I really love my dad. My dad, when he was normal, was great. Funny, smart, silly. He was great. And about every 6 to 18 months, he would go psychotic. So I learned as a child, hey, don't trust this, because this is all going to get taken away from you. Don't trust love, because it's going to hurt so much when it gets pulled away from you. So I learned, don't go too deep into love, because it's going to hurt you. And there is only love and fear in the universe. That's it. Everything is either love or fear. So the more you fill up with fear, the more love you push out. But the other side is the more love you can push in for yourself and for others, the more fear you can push out. And that's basically how you heal from anxiety, is you learn how to love that younger, wounded part of yourself and see their patterns and just be compassionate towards them, rather than what I call jabs: judgment, abandonment, blame, and shame. Because when we're younger, we experience a trauma that's too much for us to bear. Parents get divorced, we're abused, and we can't understand how to deal with that. So what we do is, and Freud again, I keep quoting him a little bit, you push it down, you repress it. So it gets pushed down into your unconscious mind, out of the conscious mind into the unconscious. And the body keeps the score. So the body is a representation of your unconscious mind. So if your unconscious mind has all these wounds in it, which is basically what you unearthed when you did ketamine, it comes out in the body.
Yeah.
So why aren't we using the body to kind of heal the mind? And that's what I was saying earlier. If we don't actually access the body and how this feels, that is our access to our younger self. So when you feel anxious, this is what I say to everybody, when you feel anxious, you're really alarmed. That's what's happening in your system. You have a physiological and psychological alarm going on, and it's from the younger version of you. So where do you feel that? Do you feel it in your throat? Do you feel it in your chest? Do you feel it in your belly? And is it hot? Is it cold? Is it icy? Is it sharp? Is it dull? Does it have a color? Does it have a shape? Is it deep? Is it superficial? Where is this? Because this wounding, this alarm that's in your system, I believe is a representative of your younger self that's asking for your attention. It's asking to be seen, heard, loved, and protected now in a way that it wasn't back then. And you're not a child anymore, so we don't have to be victims anymore. That's the other thing about being a victim, is that everybody who's anxious feels like a victim. And when you feel like a victim, your brain secretes norepinephrine, which basically stresses your brain out. And it also creates cortisol from your adrenals, from your kidneys, above your kidneys. And that fires your whole system up into survival mode. When you go into survival mode, you paralyze the prefrontal cortex. You paralyze the part of your brain that does your rational thought. So not only do you start making up more stories about fear and anxiety and worries, and I'm never going to be normal again, I'm never going to be doing my podcast again, but the part of your brain that would say, hey, these worries, they're not actually that real, is paralyzed. So you get double whammy.
Wow.
One is you make more threat, and two, the part of your brain that would tell you that this threat isn't really that much to worry about is shut off. So of course, and that's what creates this snowball. So that's when you go worse and worse and worse. And what we do is we try and fix that with thinking. And we really have to use thinking and feeling. So find it in your body. When you feel anxious, or what I like to call alarm, when you feel alarmed, search your body, get out of your head. Your head's not, you're not going to solve a feeling problem with a thinking solution. So it's a matter of going into your body, finding that place in you, and seeing it as your younger self, and showing that part of you that they're seen, heard, loved, and protected. And you're not going to judge, abandon, blame, and shame them anymore. So going back to what I was saying earlier, you experience a trauma that's too much to bear. Your conscious mind pushes it down into the unconscious, which offloads it into your body. And then it stays in your body for the rest of your life, unless you deal with it. And this is what I mean about bringing it up, finding that place in you, because that is the younger you. That is the younger Jordan. That is the part of you that needed more love and attention than what you got.
Yeah. Wow. So how do we do that? Like for people who are listening who have had significant trauma, want to connect to their younger self, what are some tools?
Well, one of them is psychedelics, but that's kind of like hitting an ant with a sledgehammer. Like it's pretty major.
That's such a good analogy.
I like using that term quite a bit.
I mean, I've hit a lot of ants with sledgehammers because I've done ayahuasca, ketamine, hero's dose of psilocybin. Some have been really positive and some have been extremely traumatic. So, yeah, that's why I was telling myself, like, I've done too much to my brain, so I must have turned on some kind of like schizophrenia, thing, which also, like, just a tangent. Did you ever have a fear that because it runs in your family or because your father had schizophrenia that you would have that?
Of course, that's a brilliant question. And that's basically, I think, why I developed such severe anxiety is because from the time I was 16 years old, I would study schizophrenia. It's becoming a doctor wasn't a big stretch for me. It's pretty obvious that I was going to try and figure this out. So one of the worries that I had was becoming schizophrenic, and that's what caused a tremendous amount of anxiety for me, because I saw, my dad go into the psychiatric intensive care. I eventually committed suicide. There were so many things about my dad that were so traumatic, and like on the flip side, but I loved him very much. So it was this, push-pull all the time. So it was understanding that I have to really find myself. So I said, okay, well, if you don't have schizophrenia by 25, you're probably not going to get it. Most people with schizophrenia will show up before 25. Okay, then it was 30. It's like, if you don't show up by 30, And then it was 35. And it's like, okay, I got 35. It's like, okay, I think I dodged that bullet. Plus, I went through med school, in my 20s as well. So it was kind of like, if you can make it through med school and not go schizophrenic, then you're probably not going to. But I've always pushed myself too hard. So it's one of those things that I think pushing yourself too hard just leads you into anxiety. And pushing yourself too hard is often a sign of anxiety because you're always keeping yourself so busy that you don't have a chance to settle into yourself and actually allow yourself to feel the pain of those old wounds. And if you've got to feel it to heal it. So if you don't allow yourself to feel that pain and go through it, you're not going to heal it. Now, there's a proviso to that. If you've had severe emotional, physical, sexual abuse, you can't do this on your own. Like, you need someone to help. And that's why I really suggest like internal family systems therapy or somatic experiencing or one of these therapies that really focuses on the body more than the mind. And you need to ground yourself in your body first, because my wife Cynthia is a somatic trauma therapist as well. And she said to me something the other day that really stuck with me. She said, cognitive therapies appear to work quite quickly, actually. Changing your thoughts does work. But it doesn't last because there's nothing to root into it. Now you root into your body. That's how you learn these things and settle into your body so that you know that they're safe. So somatic therapies take longer. And if therapy's $150, $200 an hour, somatic therapy takes a while. But it also provides you with a grounding that these cognitive therapies can now sink into and create long-lasting healing. So I see a lot of people go through therapy and they have a therapist and they go for 6 months. It's like, oh, I feel so much better because you've been having these heart-to-heart chats every week. But you're really not actually changing the root cause of the issue. You're just changing how you think about it. So it's really learning to do both. So that's what my book, Anxiety RX, is all about. Is one of the things in there is about the ABCs. So aware. What are the patterns that you have when you get anxious or alarmed? For me, I start worrying about my health. And as a medical doctor, I don't get the simple diseases. I get the most complicated diseases there are. And when I graduated from med school, I won the award for knowing the most diseases out of all because I had all those diseases. That's why.
Because you really did, or you thought you did?
No, I thought I did.
Oh, right, exactly.
I had huge medical students disease for sure. So it's like they would say, what's the heliotrope rash? And I said, well, that's dermatomyositis, an early sign of dermatomyositis. So it's like I knew all these things. But it's not because I was some gifted medical student. It's because I believed at one point in time I had all these things.
Yeah.
So it's really understanding that this anxiety, this thing that we call anxiety of the mind, is really a state of alarm in your body. And that alarm in your body is your younger self. And sometimes, as a medical doctor and a neuroscientist, I want to have a seizure because this sounds so woo. It just sounds so out there. But I tried every therapy for 30 plus years. And the only thing that really made a huge difference for me was somatic therapy, internal family systems, and going back and finding that younger version of me. That's basically how I healed instead of just coped. Because science will help us, like learning the physiological side. Huberman is wonderful for that, giving us the science-based knowledge of how these things work in the body. But we're mind, body, and spirit. So we physicians are good at mind, and to some extent body as well. But we're not good at spirit.
That's true.
So I'm sure you ran into a bunch of medical doctors who just didn't understand.
Yeah. I mean, that was my whole life, pretty much. Because before anxiety, I had chronic Lyme disease, all the autoimmune conditions, any weird chronic ailment I have had. I didn't just think I really had it. Like rashes all over my face. My lips blew up for like 2 years when I was pregnant and after. I mean, really weird things.
Yeah.
And I think it's a very highly sensitive body. And I think it's also really connected to the spiritual.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a very spiritual podcast. So nothing that you say would sound woo-woo to us. What kind of spiritual techniques and things do you feel help to incorporate? I mean, you said the somatic therapy and all that kind of stuff.
I don't know if it's anything specific. I think it's really making that intention. Because what intention does is it takes the conscious mind, what you want to get better in your life, and it actually provides a route into the unconscious mind. So when you intend to do something, you're actually giving that unconscious mind a direction. It may not understand the language of it, but it certainly understands the meaning behind what you're trying to accomplish. So if your intention is to find that younger version of you, and I usually tell people, look, when you feel anxious, or what I like to call alarmed, scan your body. Look for the alarm in your body, because that's where it is. That's what you need to find. And some people, like, it's in their throat. You know, I see a lot of women who had a narcissistic mom, or a mom that was like, oh, you're gaining some weight, you know, you better watch that, you know. They have a lot of alarm in their throat, often. Not always, but that's usually a lot of times where it shows up. So it's like, okay, find that alarm in your throat. Where is it? Is it deep? You know, does it have a color? What size is it? You know, let's find that. Really drill down into it. There's a part of our brain called the insula, and the insula is deep inside of our brain. And it's kind of like the way station between the mind and the body, and the body and the mind. So it kind of translates what the mind is saying to the body, and what the body is saying to the mind. Now, it also, I believe, holds an emotional signature of our pain. So if we were left as a child, or if we were abused as a child, I believe that insula encodes this feeling in the body. And that feeling in the body at 5, when your mom was yelling at you, is the same feeling you have now when you're in a grocery store and you hear across the aisle someone else yelling at someone else. It's the same thing. So your body will feel exactly the same way through this part of our brain called the anterior insula. So it creates this emotional signature of pain. And I believe that when we go into these anxious phases, we feel like we did when we were 5, 10, 12, 15 years old. So it's like finding that 5, 10, 15-year-old and going, hey, you know, even if you have a picture of yourself at that age, put it up beside in your bathroom mirror and say, hey, I've got you, you know. Now the reason why people are anxious is because ultimately it's a mind-body disconnect, for one. And it's also a disconnect between your adult self and your child self. Now I'm going to say that again because it's really important. So anxiety is a mind-body disconnect. That's why exercise, yoga, all that stuff helps it. It's also an adult self, child self disconnect. So the adult in you doesn't want to go back to the child because the child holds all your pain. And the child is expecting the adult to come and save them, but they never do. So the child is like, okay, well, I'm going to withdraw because you're not looking after me. And the adult's like, well, I don't want to go back and visit that bullying, that shame, that neglect, whatever. I don't want to go back there. And that separation creates a tremendous amount of alarm in our system. It also creates that inner critic in us as well. So when we're a child and we have a trauma that's too much for us to bear, we start looking at ourselves like we're the problem. And there's a great saying that says when you abuse, neglect, or abandon a child, the child doesn't stop loving the parent, they stop loving themselves, right? So when we start loving ourselves, that left hemisphere in our brain goes, well, what's wrong with me? And then you start judging, abandoning, blaming, and shaming that child. So if you're bullied, there's part of you that actually agrees with your bullies. Well, maybe they're right. You know, maybe my nose is too big. Maybe my eyes are too close together. Maybe there is something wrong with me. And that starts the inner critic. And the inner critic feeds the alarm, and the alarm feeds the inner critic. So that gets bigger and bigger and bigger as you become 5, 10, 15 years old. And by the time we're 20, 21 years old, that voice has become very, very strong. And we lose our authentic self in this voice, and we start believing that we are this voice. And that separation, while we're in that separation, we can never heal from anxiety. Anxiety is a mind-body disconnect, and it's an adult self, child self disconnect. So as we bring back the mind and the body, you know, getting into breathing, doing rituals, meditating, whatever we're doing, and we start paying attention to that younger version of ourselves, that's how we heal it permanently. It's not like, you can feel better by changing your thoughts, absolutely, doing affirmations, like we're in LA, and I was just joking with Leandra all weekend. It's like, make a little sort of curve in your tongue at the bottom and go, oh. It's like ally, or an ally, or an ally.
We are the Valley Girls,
you know,
yes.
Yeah, so it's, you know, up in Victoria, British Columbia, you would say, are you going to LA? It's like, yes, we're going to LA. But when you're down here, it's like ally, or an ally.
Yes.
So it's
so
like, you know.
True.
Because I did stand-up comedy for 10 years.
Oh, wow.
So, you know, I toured Canada and that kind of stuff with Yuck Yucks. And
that's so cool.
it was fun. You know, it was fun. And it was part of exercising that kind of right hemisphere, that analytical part of our brain. Because we worriers get really caught up in that left hemisphere. We get really caught up in making sense of how our body feels. And usually your left hemisphere is not going to make stories about kittens, puppies, and picnics, when you're alarmed. It's going to make up stories like, oh my God, is my partner going to leave me? Oh my God, am I going crazy? Am I ever going to do my podcast again? We're going to go through all these things. And then because we made them up, we believe them.
Yeah.
Because we made the stories, right? So they get grandfathered in this way that we believe the stories because we made them up, and we made them in response to this alarm energy that's been sitting in our body since we were children. So it makes perfect sense. So it creates this loop of anxiety in the mind, which is making sense of the alarm in the body. And then when we believe those anxieties, the alarm gets worse. And then when the alarm gets worse, we paralyze our prefrontal cortex. Like I said earlier, we paralyze that part of our brain that would say, hey, these worries are nothing to worry about.
Yeah.
So we get double whammied in that. So the alarm makes the anxiety worse, and then the anxiety makes the alarm worse.
Yes.
So we get caught in this alarm anxiety
loop.
cycle that I talk about in the book. So it's like, how do you start healing from anxiety? Well, you have to break the alarm anxiety cycle. You have to go in and feel the alarm in your body, but don't allow yourself to connect thoughts to it, because that's how you split the cycle apart. That's how you heal. Now, that's much easier said than done. But that's how you heal. You break apart the alarm. You start paying attention to that alarm because it is your younger self. And then you start seeing that the anxious worries and the anxious thoughts are just your brain trying to make sense of the pain.
Wow.
So I have this little saying that I call sensation without explanation. So you go in, you feel alarmed, and you go, okay, I'm just going to have sensation without explanation. Sensation, I'm going to feel the sensation because it's not going to be comfortable, the alarm, right? So where's the alarm in you, Jordan? I've been doing a lot of talking here.
I mean, I'm soaking everything in that you're saying.
Sure.
I'm taking mental notes.
Sure.
Okay, so I mostly feel it in my chest.
Okay.
I'll feel it in my throat and in my stomach. Like this whole kind of like central channel will get very, very tight.
Yeah. And there's a reason why that neuroanatomically, but we'll go into it now. So where would you say the strongest alarm is in your system?
Probably in my chest.
Okay. So you pointed to here. So is it sort of deep in your chest? Is it kind of on the surface? Like, where is it?
It feels very deep. It feels like my heart is getting like squeezed.
Okay. So if you really get into that, like, close your eyes for a second and really focus on that sensation. And maybe put your hand over that area. And just settle in. Take your time. And just see if you can describe that in as much detail as you can. No rush. Take your time.
I mean, thankfully, I don't feel it right now, which is a very good thing compared to earlier this year. But I know that it just feels like this, out of my control, like my body takes over, and heart racing, heart clenching, like I just lose control of my body, my breath. And it makes me very disassociated. So I just like leave my body.
And what happens when you leave?
I
worry, for one, probably.
Well, when I leave, I mean, it makes me feel so out of control.
Sure.
I remember feeling like my body was here, but I was out here in the energy and couldn't control myself. So I'd be with people when this is happening, and I wouldn't understand how they could like talk and just have these like control functions over their body, because I was like, anything I can do to survive that moment is what I was trying to do.
Yeah. And that's what you're trying to do as a child too. So just like when did you feel abandoned as a child?
Something that comes up, like when I hear you talking, is that my dad was very volatile. So even though we're close now, and he's a very good father in certain ways, he was so explosive. He was always yelling. So I felt really unsafe. But I didn't feel abandoned because he was there. But yeah, my mom didn't really stick up for me or for herself. So I think that's a form of abandonment too.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we have a reactive self and we have an authentic self. So when your authentic self isn't accepted as a child, if you're, too fat, too loud, whatever it is, if your personality, if you've got a size 12 personality and a size 6 house, you're going to feel rejected. And then when we feel rejected, we start turning that on ourselves. And then that becomes this sort of inner critic that drives the anxiety. So it's really, and the inner critic isn't your enemy. You know, it basically was trying to protect you. So with you, you know, can I take you through a little exercise? Are you okay?
Please.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So close your eyes for a sec, Jordan. Just relax your shoulders, relax your jaw, feel your butt in the chair. Maybe put your feet flat on the floor if you can. Let your shoulders drop a little bit. Relax your jaw. Maybe let a breath come in and out. And again. You're doing great. So I want you to imagine your dad yelling. And tell me when you have that sense.
Mm-hmm.
Does that light up that same place in your chest, or is it more your throat or your belly?
Yeah, it's like my chest and my throat.
Okay, so see if you can put your hand over that area. When you do that, when you feel sort of like the warmth of your hand, or maybe just make little tiny circles with your hand over that area, does that soothe it at all?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So this is you connecting with little Jordan. So this is one of those spiritual practices that's so important to do to connect with yourself. So do you have any judgments on that little girl? Like she should have done something more, better, different?
No.
Okay. So tell her that.
Telling her in my
Comfortable.
head.
Okay. That's fine. Now, is there also another place kind of in your belly that's sort of lit up right now too?
Mm-hmm.
Because I can kind of feel that too. So maybe take your other hand and put it on your belly and your first hand on your throat. And just make little circles with them. So what you're doing again is you're accessing this anterior insula in your brain that is accessing that old feeling in your body that you had when your dad was yelling.
Mm-hmm.
And you're changing it just by connecting with it. So this is something I would suggest you do every day. And you don't have to do it for long. It's actually better to do this like 3 or 4 times a day for 30 seconds to a minute than it is for doing it every day for 10 minutes or something like a meditation.
Wow.
So how are you right now?
I feel like I just entered a whole new room. I mean, it's
Okay.
crazy.
Okay.
Yeah, I feel good. I feel calm.
Yeah. Because what's going to happen when you go in there is she's going to feel heard, seen and heard, in a way that she wasn't back then. So that's how we heal.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm shocked right now because
Okay.
I'm noticing that even before we did that exercise versus now, I feel so much more in my body. I feel so much more in the room, which is making me realize I still struggle with the disassociating way more than I figured.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that's like a baseline, like I tend to do that. But I also have been working on that this whole year. So it's just fascinating
Yeah.
that it's still such a prominent thing.
And it will be until it's not.
Mm-hmm.
So the more you can access this younger version of you, this authentic you, like the real sensitive Jordan, that didn't have to be quiet for her dad, that didn't have to make herself small. Because I have a sense that you had to make yourself quite small in your house.
Well, the thing is, I didn't do that, and so
Okay. Did you go the other way?
Yeah. So
Okay.
the judgment that I would have on myself, if any, was at the time things that like my mom would say or my dad were that I was making it worse because I was challenging him rather than having like my mom stand up for me or my dad apologize. It would always be like, well, you provoked him.
Mm. So how does that show up in your day-to-day life now? You're afraid to provoke people.
Yeah. I mean, probably why I'm such a people pleaser.
Yeah. And it's worked for you. Like you've learned how to create this part of you that is getting your needs met in perhaps a different way. And I think we all do that. We all develop reactive parts of ourselves that are often very adaptive. But again, it takes us away from our authentic self as well. And, you can't go through life in just your authentic self. Like, it just doesn't happen. And we need a reactive self to kind of show us where our dharma is, where our life is supposed to go. Because the people that don't have trauma, it's traumatic for them. When you have all the money you need and you always grew up and you never really had any sort of troubles or wounds, like, the best people are the ones that had trauma when they're younger, but their parents or caregivers were able to resolve it at the time, because what it teaches your nervous system is that I can be traumatized, but I can still be okay. Leandra over there, we used to play this game when she was younger called Sea Monster. So she would come into the room, yell out Sea Monster, and me being the aforementioned Sea Monster would start chasing the damsel around the house, and she would scream. Like, she was in high sympathetic activity, fight or flight. And then, like, 5 minutes later, we'd be on the couch and just having a snuggle and a cuddle.
Yeah.
And I didn't know it back then, but what I was doing was I was calibrating her nervous system to show her, hey, you can go up to the high, your heart rate's really high, your blood pressure's up. But you can also, in 5 minutes, come right back down to a place where you're, into this sort of loving, warm, parasympathetic place, too. So I don't think we had that as children. I think it went up and then it just kind of got left there. My guess is with you, your dad kind of calmed down, but it was never really resolved or dealt with. It was like, okay, well, we just hope it doesn't, happen again too quickly. And you just learn that your sympathetic fight or flight system shuts off very slowly, because that was your experience as a child. So when I was showing Leandra that you can go into this high fight or flight state and then go into a very relaxed parasympathetic state within 5 minutes. For us with trauma, when we grow up with trauma, that's just something that wasn't part of our nervous system, and it's still not. So we will notice that we will get excited or anxious about something, and it takes us a long time to settle down, to be able to eat, to be able to sleep, to whatever. And that's a lot of it is a throwback from childhood, because it wasn't resolved when we were younger. And our parents, they did the best they could, which is a very common saying that kind of irks me a bit. But there wasn't the self-realization and the self-examination that there is now, with adults, and especially with parents. So it's one of those things that, and your parents are operating from their own wounding as well. So they go unconscious. Their prefrontal cortex gets shut off. So they start reacting at a very reactive self. And then when you're a reactive parent, you're going to create a reactive child.
Yeah.
And go back, and every child that's born is going to be more and more reactive, typically.
Wow.
There's a great saying that says, the trauma and drama of a family will land squarely in the heart of its most sensitive child. So there's a lot of families I see where one child is, wired and just, really excited about things, and the other one is like, well, whatever, man. Whatever.
Totally.
So and the one that holds the problems typically is the one that's the most sensitive.
Well, that was definitely me. And it's also what I call the pattern breaker in the family, in a spiritual sense.
Sure.
Because then we have to transmute all of this trauma, whether it's generational trauma or our own childhood trauma, all of it. And something else I was just thinking is that my dad, he did have that abandonment when he was young. He has a lot of memories. One of them being he was left in the hospital by his parents when he was like 5. And they said, we're going to come back tonight and visit you. And they never came, and they didn't come for like a week. And then they said that their car broke down. So that was hugely traumatic to him. And then they would leave him a lot at the neighbor's house across the street and say, we'll pick you up before you go to sleep. And then they would never come. So then he would just sit in the front window of the neighbor's house trying to watch and see if his parents were going to come home, and they didn't. So, I mean, he's 77 now, and he still talks about this when I ask him. He's such a sensitive person like me, and this shaped his entire personality.
Yeah. It's funny, because boys are more sensitive than girls. And we don't have the same tools of being able to self-soothe as girls do. So boys really suffer. Like they really, really suffer. And I'm creating a podcast with my friend Nima, who's a retired chiropractor, called Mangxiety, which is basically anxiety with an M on the front of it. And it's talking and trying to make men's mental health cool to share.
I love that.
Which is hard. I'm
going to send it to every man that I know.
Absolutely. Because it is one of those things that Nima and I are very passionate about, the fact that, men have a much higher suicide rate than women.
Wow.
Men can't cry. That's the thing, right? So if you look at how our brain adapts to things, tears are one of the things that allow us to adapt. So your pet still died, you're still getting a divorce, like nothing in the external world has changed, but there's something about tears that actually change your neurophysiology and your neurochemistry that allow you to kind of go, okay, because after a cry, you're like, okay, well, that's still horrible, but I feel better because your brain's starting, and sleep's the other thing too. So men aren't, we're conditioned not to cry from the time we're like 2 or 3 years old. So we're actually losing. And I'm not saying that men should just all of a sudden just burst into tears everywhere. A lot of times I will tell my my male friends or my male clients or something like, you don't have to have anyone see you, right? And like you can just go and do this on your own.
Yeah.
There's one thing I call car screaming, which is basically you go into the car, and this works for women too. You can go to the car, and if you're just really frustrated, right, you just go in and you roll up the windows, drive to like a quieter area, and just start screaming. And it's amazing how often my male friends and clients will say, and the tears just came out because it's so hard for men. Like like Bill Burr talks about that. Like, just stuff it down, just stuff it down, just stuff it down, right? And that's what happens, man. Just stuff it down and stuff it down and stuff it down. And we're good at stuffing it down. I mean, it sounds like a bit of an oxymoron. We're good at stuffing it down, but there's a price. That energy. Second law of thermodynamics: energy cannot be created nor destroyed, only changed in form. Yeah. So we just stuff it. It's in there.
Yeah.
So, and it's same with women as well, but it's just that energy's in there as a state, like I say, of alarm.
Yeah.
And unless we start metabolizing that alarm and doing it slowly, like 6 episodes of psychedelics in 3 weeks is a bit intense,
So intense. Oh my God.
Because you don't give yourself a chance to acclimatize to the new brain state, right? So I'm not surprised that you felt like you were losing your mind.
Yeah, it was a very hard time. And it also just highlighted to me that I've had anxiety my whole life, but that I was living and operating like someone who didn't, and I was high functioning or whatever it could be called. So I didn't give it the proper credit or the proper healing, that I was so miserable all the time because I was so anxious. Right. So that is so true. Quick question for you about anxiety medication.
Sure.
What are your thoughts?
I mean, I think it's very valuable. I think we need medication. I don't in any way mean to slag medical doctors. I mean, I think it's a tough job to be a medical doctor. I think that we kind of assume that we're a bigger part of healthcare than what we really are in reality. I think seeking out alternative forms of healthcare is great. But also, medical doctors are wonderful at a lot of things. And one of the things that I haven't been too crazy about is seeing medical doctors. Oh, you're just pill pushers. That's all you're doing. The human brain has this compulsion to reduce things to like a little bite-sized package. And one of the things that medical doctors are getting slagged for is like you're just writing prescriptions. You're just writing prescriptions. Now, that's partly true. I think that is partly true. I think we do get into this position where we overprescribe because medical doctors aren't trained in trauma. They're not really trained in things like Lyme disease. They're not trained. See, that's the thing about Lyme disease is I see a lot of people claim they have Lyme disease when really what they have is childhood trauma. Because
I agree.
Lyme disease and childhood trauma have the same disparate, strange, seemingly unconnected symptoms.
I know.
So it's like, and people want to, exactly what I'm saying is that the human brain wants an answer. So it's like, oh, this is what it is.
Yeah.
No, it's actually childhood trauma. That's what it is. There's so many people out there that believe they have Lyme disease, then what they actually have is childhood trauma.
Yeah, I've noticed that connection.
Now that's gonna make a lot of people, I haven't.
I know.
I got the test
we can just wait for the TikTok trolls, because
Yeah,
I've said a lot of things about Lyme disease and healing and energetic spirituality and just the mind-body connection. a lot of people get it and a lot of people don't, because to have a diagnosis means a lot to certain people.
Yeah. Well, your brain secretes dopamine. When you feel like you're on the right track, your brain secretes
Totally.
And this is basically why people worry, is because worry makes the uncertain a little more certain. And when we have trauma as children, the thing we hate the most is uncertainty. So if you have a headache and you think, oh, I have a brain tumor, it's like a little, for about 0.4 of a second, your brain gets this dopamine hit. It's like, oh, okay, that makes me feel better. And then it's like, oh my God, I have a brain tumor now. So the cycle just starts over again.
Exactly.
So that's why we get addicted to worry, because we do get a little dopamine hit from making the uncertain a little more certain.
Wow, that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's why it's addictive.
Yeah.
But the thing is that that's not going to help you, right? Like worry does help you in the very short term, but it makes things much worse in the long term.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
it's learning that worry is a coping strategy. Worry is a form of dissociation. And it's like, can you stay with your body? That's what we were saying earlier. Can you just stay with your body, the sensation in your body? And if you can't, it's a good sign to get some help. Men and women.
Yeah,
like, get some help.
Totally. Wow. So on the note of medication,
Right.
I went on in the end of January, and I had never been on like any anxiety medication or SSRI before. However, this was like life or death. This was like, I will do anything. So it taught me a lot of compassion for everyone in any stage that they're in. And now I'm slowly weaning off of it as of like 5 days ago. And so it's phenomenal that I'm seeing you today.
Yeah. Are you getting the brain zaps?
Kind of.
Okay.
I mean, so this was super interesting. So I'm taking it every other day now.
Okay. How much? What's the dose?
10 milligrams.
10, okay.
Which, I've been told is very low, which
it's yeah.
lower, easier to come off of than like a higher dose, right?
Depends. Some people have a really hard
maybe
time
not
with
for
it.
those of us highly sensitive people. So
Well,
it's not like a pill that you can cut in half. So that's why I take it every other day instead of taking half. So I didn't take it on Thursday night for the first time since January. And everybody told me, you're not going to feel anything at first. It builds up in the system. You'll be fine. Oh my God.
Yeah.
I woke up with intrusive thoughts, with raging anxiety, with panic. I started getting muscle cramps. And I'm not trying to scare anybody listening, by the way. I'm just trying to talk about my experience as a highly sensitive person, because I was shocked. And so now I'm like 5 days into it and I'm scared because there's intrusive thoughts and there's the placebo effect of like, what if I'm instantly like doing horrible again? And then there's the real effects.
Of course. And it all mixes together, right? And it all puts you into survival mode. And it paralyzes that, rational thinking part of your brain that would reassure you, this too shall pass, we'll be okay, that kind of thing. And when that part of you gets paralyzed, you get the trauma full on. So, it might be an idea. I mean, I think that we can get Prozac or any of the medications into smaller, there are pharmacies that can compound things. So rather than skipping a whole day at a time, that's a lot for an SSRI. Like we have to go, typically medical doctors aren't really that well trained in how to withdraw people off medication.
Totally.
They usually withdraw you way, way, way too fast.
Yeah.
Because they've seen somebody in the past that got off Prozac in 3 weeks, so they think everybody can do that.
Yeah, the psychiatrist that I spoke to wanted me to just stop taking it. And my functional medicine doctor, who's really not, she's not like a psychiatric doctor at all, but she just knows about sensitive bodies, said, let's not do that. Yeah. And so that's why I'm doing that every other day. But I kind of feel like it's just throwing, what's it called? Throwing paint against the wall or whatever.
Yeah, you're not going to get a big dent. It's going to be traumatic. And it depends too much. It affects certain serotonin receptors, like different SSRIs affect. And if you have a lot of those serotonin receptors that it was stimulating in your brain, when you come off it, you're going to be more sensitive to it, right? So the very SSRI that helps you is going to be the hardest one to come off of. So I see people that come on and say, I took citalopram or Paxil or whatever, and I came off it like that. It didn't bother me. But I also didn't get much of an effect from it. So I would ask you, did you get a good effect from Prozac? Did it help you?
Yes, so much.
Okay,
so
so that's
much.
why. That's exactly why. So you have a preponderance of those particular, there's 12 different serotonin receptors. So you have a preponderance of the ones that Prozac affects. So the better effect you get from a medication, typically, not always, but the harder it is to come off of.
Wow.
And the more gradual you have to do it.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, so how gradual should I do it? Because nobody has been able to tell me, take it every other day for however long. Like, I'm just guessing.
yeah, which is not a great place to be,
No.
for sure. I would find a place that's, if they compound it, or, because they seem to have everything here.
Yeah,
So,
I'm sure they
find
have
a place
vanilla,
that, that drops you maybe, if you're on 10, like see if there's a compounding place that'll put 8. Put an 8.
So
and
really
but take
slow.
it every day, and then, every 2 weeks go down by maybe 2 milligrams. Now, I don't have a medical license anymore, so I'm technically going to tell you, this is how I'm going to tell you. I used to have patients that this is what they would do. They would get it compounded, and they would come off it very, very slowly. So that's what I basically have to say without a medical license.
Why don't you have the license anymore?
Because I just had a crisis of conscience with medicine. I just found that it was treating people with medications that weren't helping them. Because sometimes I didn't have a problem with antidepressants so much when they didn't work. It's when they did work. Because I would see people that I thought could probably work through some of their trauma. But now that they're on the medication, they don't feel anxious anymore, but they don't feel much of anything.
Yeah.
Right? So the thing is, you're kind of in this no man's land of, I want people to actually go back and get to the root cause and get past anxiety. But, once you start taking a medication, that adult self, child self disconnect goes even broader because it's like, I don't want to go back and see the child in me. And that's why when I talk to doctors or I talk to professionals, I rarely use the term inner child. I'll always use younger self. Right? And I find the people that have the most, like, oh, I hate that inner child shit, whatever. I hate that inner child stuff. Those are the people that have the most inner child wounding.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, that makes so much sense.
And there's so many doctors that, became doctors because they had a sick parent. Especially surgeons. The number of surgeons that had a parent with cancer is quite high. So it's like we do things as children to kind of adapt to our adult situations. So it's learning how best to treat people. And one of the things that doctors do is we're trained to give a medication. And we want to help as medical doctors. Like, we want to help. So the reason I gave up my license was I've always had this ability to see trauma in people, right? That's part of why I do what I do. And I would see trauma in people, and I would know that I only had 7 minutes. So I would see, say, a woman that came in with frequent urinary tract infections. And I could see, like, my spidey sense would tell me this woman's been sexually abused as a child, right? And that's one of the reasons why she's showing up with all these urinary tract infections. Now, I got 7 minutes. Now, I can't say, hey, did you experience sexual abuse as a child? And especially in my job, when I worked in Victoria, I had my own practice. But when I worked in Vancouver, I was kind of a gun for hire. I would work, like, kind of urgent care clinics and that kind of stuff too. So I wouldn't know the patients all that well. So it became very unfulfilling, to say the least, because I would see trauma in people and I couldn't address it. So that's one of the main reasons I got out of medicine. I don't have a license anymore, is because I think that the knee jerk is when we have 7 to 10 minutes with a patient, they come in with severe anxiety or depression. Basically, the handbook is you give them an SSRI,
Totally.
I think that we're doing people a disservice and kind of dangling them over the gates of hell, because we're actually just suspending the pain that they need to actually propel them into something new. Right? Now, by the same token, there's suicide. So, medications are really important, because if you're at the end of your rope, you don't have the capacity to be able to go in and deal with that inner child stuff. So for a while, I think medication is a great thing to get you back into
like a
the world again.
Band-Aid.
Exactly.
That's kind of the way that it had been proposed to me.
Yeah.
Like, we'll use this as like a cast on a broken arm, and then we'll slowly get to the root cause.
Yep.
One more question about that, because I'm so happy that I can ask you. If I were to take, let's say I got down to like 5 milligrams every day, and that feels good. And if I went lower, I felt really out of control, just hypothetically. Do you think that's better for a pregnancy, like the lowest dose that you can get to? Or do you think that it's just, if you're on medication, that matters?
Well, life's a trade-off. You know, so rarely do we have like the perfect situation. Now, if you said, well, I got off it, but I was anxious every day, that's not great for the developing fetus either.
Yeah.
Right? So if you're on some medication and it's keeping you semi-level and it's working for you and that kind of stuff, I would say, and this is just my opinion, that being on a relatively small dose of medication and being emotionally level is probably then just, you know, doing the cold plunge, the ice bath plunge, and just going off it completely and struggling all the way through your pregnancy with emotion.
Totally.
So, you know, so that's not great for the developing fetus either. So it's really, you know, what have you been given? You know, if you've been given a sensitive system in the first place, you know, you do what you have to do, Jordan, I think. You know, I mean, ideally, it would be best to not be on medication. But if you're not on medication and you're a wreck,
that's
or you're,
not worth
you know,
it.
the baby's feeling all that cortisol and the baby's feeling all that epinephrine. So, you know, it's really a balance. So I think women are so guilted out these days about, you know, oh, you shouldn't be doing this or you shouldn't be doing that. And, you know, you see these things where it's like, well, you got to drink 8 liters of water a day or whatever. That's an exaggeration. But, you know, you got to drink that. And then there's some people that say, no, you should basically just sort of keep yourself hydrated on a very slow, steady basis, maybe 1.5 liters a day or whatever. And people will swear by each particular thing. So we're into this place now where we have so much information, you know, and some of them are exactly the opposite of each other. So what do you do?
Totally. I just support what anyone chooses to do because I do believe that's what's best for them.
Yeah.
If they're brave enough, which I think most people, everyone listening is, to try to get to the root cause, and you still want to lean on medication because it makes your life that much, so much better, then do it.
And take it with intention.
With intention.
Exactly.
Like I take it and I tell myself God is in the medication or source is in the medication. That's why I feel so good now. That we could do a whole episode on that. And actually, we should. I want to have you on like as I wean,
well,
as
the next
I
time
like
I come back to I will do that.
Exactly. Finally, I just want to ask you a couple of the rapid fires that I ask everyone. What is your zodiac sign?
Sagittarius.
Oh, when's your birthday?
November 29th, 1960.
Oh, wow. My son's a Sagittarius. You guys are sensitive and loyal, independent, like adventurous, all the things.
Well, we went to Universal Studios yesterday and we're pretty adventurous with that mummy ride.
It sounds like it. I love Sagittariuses. So, okay, if you could be in a room with 3 people, living or dead, who would they be?
Oh, geez. Kate McKinnon. Because I love her on Saturday Night Live. I think she's so talented. Probably Freud, just because he just dove into things so much. And Jordan Peterson.
Oh, wow. What a list. I love that. Who are your mentors?
Gordon Neufeld in developmental psychology and kind of me. You know, it sounds sort of egocentric, but there isn't a whole lot of people doing what I'm doing out there. There's a lot of people that say, you know, you have to find a more spiritual aspect to life. But I think what happens is that we have to drill down and find that child that's in us. You know, we can't just sort of expect it to sort of just naturally just evolve. We have to make that intention to find that younger version of ourselves. So we can say that, you know, be more compassionate to yourself. I would say be more compassionate to that part in your chest and your throat that hurts every time you hear yelling or every time you think about that yelling. Like find that place, spend some time every day in that place showing little Jordan that she's seen, heard, loved, and protected every day, a number of times a day. The problem is that your ego won't let you do that. Your ego wants to drag you back to what's familiar all the time.
Totally.
And it's not there to hurt you. Your ego isn't there to hurt you, but basically it's trying to protect you by keeping you in the same box that you were in when you were a child. So it's just make that intention to find that younger self. That's how you heal anxiety.
Wow.
You can do all these other things. You can take medication. You can do all these, you know, ACT, CBT therapies, that kind of thing. But until you actually find that child in you, see them, hear them, love them, and protect them, that's how you heal instead of just cope.
Wow, that's amazing. Mic drop. And where can everybody find you?
The Anxiety MD is my Instagram handle. It's also my website, theanxietymd.com. My book is called Anxiety RX. I have a mind-body prescription, an online course that's $100. You know, it's just like I really have an issue with the business of trauma, so I price this at something that just about everybody can afford. And it's $100. It's not $97. It's not 3 payments or whatever. It's like if you want to pay 2 payments of $50, that's fine. I just want to get my work out there. Just sort of get people to understand that the current model of understanding and healing anxiety is not working.
Totally.
It's just not.
Wow. Well, I'm so thankful for the work that you're doing. It is life-changing. When I discovered you on Mel Robbins' podcast, when I was really suffering, she's amazing. Yeah. It was life-changing. And so many people sent it to me. Yeah. So many of my listeners said, this will change your life. This changed my life. So I'm excited that we just did this, and hopefully it'll be sent around in the same way.
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. I really
Thank you so
appreciate
much. So grateful.